All right, so I took a break on this. I don't know, you may have been wondering how I knew whether or not this masking fluid was dry. And what happens is when it's dry, it becomes more transparent. It was almost opaque in these little puddles down here, and I could see that that was still the case. And this particular one actually gets a little bit darker. The others do too, actually. They'll get a little bit darker as well as transparent. So this is now dry. I was afraid I had totally blown this area down in here, but I think it's okay. I'm seeing the distancing is working, the shadows running across through here are working. Other little details I can deal with later. There's a few little spots here that might be bothering me, but when I come back in and get these darker branches in, it's going to change how all of this looks. So I have to just sort of relax with it, even though it's not perfect, and say, okay, I'm going to work on that later. Just breathe and say, okay, I'm going to work on that later. There is a couple little tiny things here, though, that I probably do want to work on now, and that's that these lines are a little too sharp right here. The feeling of the pink trees is sort of broken, not feeling like a nice little even line, a little line of pink tree there. So I can pull that across those just a little tiny bit, and then later I can come in and get a little bit dark, maybe up in among some of these here to change the bottom of that so it doesn't feel like such a harsh line. So that's all of that. Now for my sky up here, what do we want to do with that? I'm thinking, in the photograph it's almost white. I don't want it almost white. I really want to have a little bit of color to it. Cobalt blue is one of my favorite sky colors, although frequently it's just a little too, I don't know, too blue. How can I say this? I can either gray it very slightly by adding opposite color to it, or I can add a little bit of phthalo blue to it to make it just a little closer to a turquoisey blue. And that frequently works nicely. Let me see if I've got a blank spot on one of these pieces of paper to show you. That one doesn't even have a clean spot. Margaret, you should have had this set up clean before you started, but let's try this. So this paper is absorbing a little too fast, but that can show you sort of the color that is. Let's just, maybe it's going to get thinned down a little bit. So a little bit thinner. And then the mountains, I want those to run a little toward the purple side. So cobalt blue again. Cobalt blue tends to be a little bit of a cool blue in that it leans toward the purple side. And then I want to add some of my quinacridone rose to it. And so let's just grab a little quinacridone rose here, start with some of it up in that corner so that I can see how much I'm adding in. Oh, that's going to be just about perfect. Just about perfect. I've got some other blue here that I had put down on a previous time. So when we go to put this on top of that blue, that mountain is going to stand out nice. Now, do we need to gray that very slightly? Maybe. So graying it opposite on the color wheel to blue is orange. So I can put a little tiny bit of good old burnt sienna in there. So just a little bit of burnt sienna will gray that down. Yeah, I think that's going to be a little bit better color. Okay, so I've got that made. Do I have enough of it? It's a fairly big area. It's relatively dark. I think I better make a little more. So which colors did I put in there? I put cobalt blue, a little more cobalt blue. So I'm wanting to get a good teaspoon, 2 teaspoons of color here maybe. A little bit of quinacridone rose, purple it up. And then does it still need to get grayed? Sort of see what color it is here. Or was there enough graying in it already? That's a little more purple. You know, leave it a little fresh purple. The reason why is I think it's going to look nice against that pink. Okay, so now let me rinse my brush out. It's okay if this water has a little bit of blue in it because that's what it is. I'm going to use one of my flat brushes here. So I'm just going to wet the top of the paper up here, and then we are going to put that blue in. Oh, this brush still had some blue left from a previous project. Okay. I had to rinse the brush back off. One nice thing about watercolors is that you use the water to rinse your extra paint out of your brush, and so I can just clean a brush, where if it was something like oil paints or acrylics and I had left a color in there, it would have been permanently stuck in that brush, never to come out again. I just want to make sure I don't have water running out of this and onto the rest of my paint. So pick up that little bit of excess. It's a little bit on my picture. Okay, so now this was my blue sky. This is going to have to dry at least 3/4 of the way before I can paint that blue mountain in, because if I try and paint the blue mountain too soon, it is going to just bleed up into that sky. So that's going to have to actually dry before I can do anything. So maybe we can work a little tiny bit down here in the bottom while that's drying and get some more of this feeling of the brown. We had a couple places where it needed to come up further. So this was burnt sienna. Maybe a touch of yellow in it. Okay, that's just a little bit. We're not doing a huge amount here. Where was it that I needed to deal? We needed to come up in among these trees just a wee touch. That is a tree branch there, so I don't have to worry about it. Maybe some of these needed just a wee touch more work. That need to come up into there just a little bit more. Let's pick that back off of that green. And maybe this needed some land holes rather than sky holes. Ouch. I'm also just, how dark is that green compared to the ground? Oops, that was a branch. This is a branch that runs through here, so let's just lift that. Then I know it's there. It's going to go darker, but at least it reminds me where that is. Now there was a couple spots up in here. So as we come in and start painting around a few spots here, it's going to give some shape to the bottom of those flowers. So maybe there's a little place right there. I didn't like what was happening there. I wanted a little more of that pink to show. Maybe there's some little holes in there. Maybe that. And a little too solid there, so let's just find a little bit of the bottom of that. A little bit of the bottom of those shapes. Oh, that looks better. Just sort of softening this in as it goes across some of this other orchard area. And I can just put that a little bit on top of that. And maybe there's a touch, maybe there's a little spot right in there. We're getting better edges down in there, but let's continue sort of paying attention to these bottom edges. I was thinking too much about the color running through here and wasn't really getting these bottom edges very good earlier, but now I can pay attention to that. It's sometimes hard to paint both top and bottom of an area, you know, to try and think about how that top's going to look and how the bottom's going to look all at the same time. And it's just, those are going to be, grab that right onto those because, why? Because I want to not have funny little edges where that joins. And oh, back in here, we're going to have a little darker. We could put some of this darker green that's going to come up and find the bottom of those trees and stop at that little line right there. And once I take that resist off, it'll become some trees up above. But there was some nice little spaces in here in the photograph that I rather liked that some of these darks created back here. Okay. And that's going to help sort of define some of that. And okay, this, once it dries completely, then we'll be able to find some more things. Now, my question is, are we dry enough here yet to paint this? It's very, very close, very close. Is there anything else down here that I want to do now? Some of it I'm just going to have to wait until I have more color in here to really see what's happening. That little piece of pink, although I liked it, I didn't like it. You know, it's some of these things that they seem too big. This also, I didn't like these little dark spots in there. They weren't really working. So let's just lift some of those out. Or maybe soften edges of it. And then all of that is sort of plowed ground. Keep thinking about the rows going this direction, the shadows going that direction, the trees going this direction. So as I'm putting paint on, if I keep thinking about those lines and directions, I will end up with a nicer looking pattern when I'm done. If I start randomly throwing paint down here, it's going to look chaotic and not, the feeling of pattern is not going to be there. And I know that these are all going to go darker, but sometimes it's nice to just know where they are going to be, which is what this is all about right now. And maybe getting some of that marking underneath that's going to show through eased up just a wee touch. So one thing, transparent watercolor, your layers underneath show a little bit. And so sometimes you have to pick off something that you know will end up being a pattern that comes through later. Okay, this is going to go quite a bit darker. I think I can dive in. This is not 100% dry, but it's almost dry. If I do it too soon, what's going to happen is I'll have bleeding up there on the top. So maybe we can just try a little tiny bit of it over here where it's not going to be as noticeable. No, that edge is going to hold, so I can do this now. Okay. When your page is damp, but not 100% dry, sometimes what you get is just a slight softening to this edge, which I think could be nice. So then once I've got that painted up on there, then I can just pull this right down. We had some sky holes that we were going to put down in here further, so let's just bring that paint down and over my pink area. And I sure hope I mixed enough of that. Remember, I wanted to get a good fat couple teaspoons worth so that I'd have enough to get all the way across here without having to mix again. I'm just right there. It feels like it was a little bit too thick. And I'm just sort of looking at my photograph and seeing what the shape of this mountain is. It's Mount Diablo. The photograph was taken out in Brentwood, which is on the east side of Mount Diablo, an area that used to be all farms, but is now slowly becoming more and more housing developments, people wanting to sort of move out into the country area. I know and I probably shouldn't say this, but because it'll show my age, but when I first moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, Brentwood was where we went to pick peaches. And there were very few houses out there except for the farmhouses. It was a small community, and it's changed. But so much has changed. So much has changed. As more and more people live in the area, and more and more development happens. And we're going to have just barely enough paint here to get this done. I'm almost not enough here at the end, I'm afraid. Trying to get my brush marks to sort of be mountain direction. I want that pretty flat, and I think I'm now at the point where I better not touch it. I almost want to come back and touch there, but I think I better just stay away from it because, yeah, it's okay. I'll throw a little tiny bit back in there and just try and get that edge just a little more so that it feels a little more like it. Okay. Now we do really need to stay away from it, and I got it down into, there was one more sky hole right there. Okay. I think I got all my little sky holes. Now we let that dry completely, 100%, and then we'll take the masking fluid off, and lo and behold, we'll have peach trees against a dark mountain. So we are now at the fun part of this painting, because now I'm going to be able to take off that resist, see how that blue mountain worked against the pink, and then start building in the dark spaces. You know, a painting goes through awkward stages, and it just went through a very awkward stage in that I didn't have a lot of value differences, and so this is still feeling very dull in here because there's not a lot of value difference. I do like the shadows that are happening. I'm liking that mountain, and I'm hoping that when I pull this resist off, I like it as well. So lifting tools, this one is a used one. I've had it for quite a while. This is a brand new, pretty well, almost brand new one. You can buy it with wherever you buy your masking fluid. So it's called a lift-off tool. It's a slightly gummy rubber. You don't really want to use an eraser. That's a little too soft, breaks down a little too easy. But this will pick up. And once you get this going, sometimes you can just get on this and pull it. It'll come off in sheets. And I need to be a little bit careful. I did try and go through and lift any extra paint that had been sitting on this, but sometimes that paint will rub off onto what you're doing as you rub this. So that's one reason why I'm pulling the excess off of here fairly frequently, so that I'm not having a bundle of dirty rubber. Latex rubber is what this is made out of. If you're highly allergic to latex, you don't want to use it. Just want to get all the little bits off. See, it's already starting to look good in that corner. This is always a fun little reveal to pull this off and see how it worked. And I like what I did with getting my edges up there, and it's not lifting off my pink paint, so we are in good shape. I was a little bit concerned. Remember that maybe some of the darker shades of it might lift and we'd notice what this bottom line was, but it's not showing, so. Isn't that purpley blue beautiful with that pink? And I like what's happened with some of those little sky holes in there. I may still want to come in and do a little bit of work in the trees after we've gotten those branches in. We're just going to have to see if the dark branches are enough, or if we need to add some more darker pink in places to give the trees a little more liveliness. You know, one thing that I have done, if I haven't had a lift-off tool, is to actually use the pile of this that I've lifted up. It's still a little bit sticky, and sometimes it can be used to grab this, but it doesn't work as good as the lift-off tool. And as I was noting earlier, if there's some dirty paint on this when you go to pick it up, it might actually rub a little bit of that off onto your surface, which we don't want to have happen. I'm just trying to make sure that I've got this all lifted up. It looks almost the same as my little sky holes, so I might be missing a little bit of it. Yes, that's got a very lively intersection up there. I might drop a little tiny bit of pink into some of those whiter spots, but we'll see. Okay, I think we've got all of that. I want to find some of these smaller branches up in the top and then these bigger ones. And I'm going to start with a little bit lighter brown and then come back in and do dark so that we can have a little bit of feeling of light coming across through here. There is a little light on the tops of these. There's light that's coming from this side of the picture and across here, so it's almost a backlit piece. Okay, so let's see what we can do here. And let's see, I had a branch drawn right here. And as I'm doing these branches, in some places, you know, pink will overlap. And if I don't want it all there, I can maybe just paint around some of it, leaving what looks like, you know, little flower bits behind there. But since we're going dark, we can paint right over those pinks and have it work really quite nicely. And then this branch maybe comes up in here and we see a little bit of it. I'm having to sort of make some of this up. And as it gets higher up here, they're going to branch out. And there's little skinny branches that run between these. And maybe there's a branch that's right there. Having to make some of this up because it's not really showing in my picture. Isn't that nice? So just putting in a few of those, even though I don't have them to the full darkness that they'll go, just a few of them start making this feel better. They're going to come right on down into here. These are all going to be darker than the background. And maybe we can just leave a little bit of what would be a couple of weeds there at the bottom. Probably not good orchard practice. And I'm seeing a little bit of a curve there on the where those branches come in and go change direction. So we're going right in on top of some of what we painted across here. It's going to go pretty dark, so most of that other stuff underneath will get hidden. I'm seeing a little gnarly bit of trunk there. Let's let that be there because it's sort of interesting. And then down here at the bottom, we're just letting that be a little uneven. Here's another little bit darker tree trunk right there in the distance. And maybe we can see some of those branches. Here's another tree trunk right there. I'll try and keep my head out of this. I'm terrible about getting my head in too far when I'm doing detailed stuff like this. Gotta keep reminding myself not to do that. And so then we have branches that come off here. Maybe break and go off like that. This one comes up, and let's let it have some space up in here somewhere. And maybe a little side branch. And let's let it have another branch that goes off that way. Some of these guys will have little branches that work between them. And some of these guys stay pretty big, pretty far up because it's been pruned so many times. I want to make sure that that feels like little flowers where it breaks through there. And then maybe that breaks off. And okay, we'll just make a branch like that. And let this guy have a branch off this direction. Just sort of making things up a little bit now. Trying to keep the feel of those branches similar. Without even going to the real dark, this is helping a lot. I just have to keep working my way across here. It takes a little bit of time. Hope this isn't boring you too much, that it's the same thing as we work through. But I'm trying to think about what the shape of those branches are as I'm putting them in, and how you do get this little bit of a curve space where they join. Maybe this one needs another branch coming off of here. I got that a little bit big at the bottom. Don't like that. Now this was going behind. And that branch is going to come out this way. Maybe it's got a side branch that comes off of it there. In my photograph, I'm seeing this as being a fairly strong branch all the way across here and really working its way in front of those. So I'm going to break that a little bit more. Some more of these skinny branches coming down in here. One nice thing about darks is that you really can then cover quite a lot of the sins of what had come up and around it earlier. And so some places where some of the green had come up onto those tree trunks. Okay, this is starting to come together. Now I can come back in with my darker brown, and if it's too dark, we'll see. I've got it's almost black, and so that's gonna gnarly. Yeah, this is gonna work. There's a little bit of highlight on the tops of those branches, so I can just sort of thin it out over to there. Take this brush and sort of thin it a little bit as it gets over there. Take a little bit off on my some of this goes off into that shadow. Soften the edge of what I had there. Soften that edge while it's still a little bit wet. Going just a little bit darker here gives it just a little more liveliness, doesn't it? The contrast is what pulls our eye in here, and so then we start really seeing the brightness of the pink becomes that much brighter because we have the contrast of this dark here. So that needed to go just a little bit darker there. I took too much of it off. So why did I bother putting that lighter brown on to begin with if I'm going to paint right over the top of it? Well, one reason is that I can use it to stay out a little bit on the light side, and it also gives me a sort of a base, a warmth, a little damp area for the dark paint to go into so that my brush marks don't show as much. And it allows me to play with this thing of where is it light and dark on those tree trunks. So maybe it's a little bit lighter on that side of that tree trunk and then really dark over here. Get the head out of there, Margaret. Now remember too that our forward tree trunks are probably going to be a little bit darker than the ones further away because of the aerial perspective and how when you have moisture in the air, it adds a little veil to the air and thus makes it a little slightly opaque or translucent rather than being totally transparent. Let's see, and that's going to be darker right up there because those guys are going to hide that. Let's get that. And, you know, I'm feeling like at least part of this needs to come up. It doesn't have to be the whole thing, but at least part of that needs to come all the way up through there. And maybe this one too. It just wasn't feeling I like some of those breaks, but right in there it just felt like I needed to maybe not have it broken. Give a little more strength to this particular tree. And maybe over in here, one of these guys should go all the way through to which one? I think maybe this one right here. And it can have some little holes where those hit it, so that it can go almost all the way through, and maybe this comes down in here further. Yeah, I like that better. Okay. So we'll just have to decide if all of these are going to be as dark. And this is still darkish over there, but maybe not as dark. Just let what be seems like a few little flowers right there, and here too. This is coming up. So I think we're probably going to have to stop before I'm totally done. Well, I'm not going to, I want to stop and look at this before I do any of the pinks in there, and also the shadowing underneath of the trees. But let me get all this tree stuff painted in here. Okay, that's feeling pretty good. Now this medium brown, now that we've got these on here, these shadows just feel like they're going to have to go quite a bit darker. This one all the way across there, and maybe some more dry brush. Sort of grabbing the bottom of those trees, because the shadows come off the bottom of the tree, so that dark has to come right off the bottom of that tree, or else it looks like the tree is just floating. So this really helps tie those trees down to the ground. Anchoring them in might be another way of putting it. Okay, and maybe there's a few more dark branches right up here. My brush has gotten a little dry there. A few more dark branches up here in the top. I'm going to stop on this for now. I need to step back from this. The thing when you're painting, when you get your head down in here and you're just really looking at it carefully, we don't see the details any longer. It all just starts melding into this thing that we're trying to do, and maybe we're having a hard time with it, and we're struggling with it. And so then we don't see how the whole picture looks. And at this point, I know I want to stop so that I can set this and look at it from across the room and see how the whole picture is going and see what I need to do to tie the last little bits of it together. We're probably going to need some brown dry brush over here. That would be my guess, is that this is going to need some more dry brush. Maybe we're going to do with some splattering in there to make some of that interesting. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to look at it from a distance, and then we will go. I'm almost done with this painting, but I feel like there's just a little bit more that needs to be done to finish it. I want to get a little bit more sense of depth in the trees, and I'm feeling like there's something that needs to happen up here to make that more interesting. And I need to decide if we're going to put the dark trees that were in the original photograph back here. There's no guarantee. It may not be necessary. I may not even need those in there. But I am feeling like something needs to happen up here, and I wasn't sure I wanted that really dark tree up there, and now I'm not so sure. Maybe I do need it. Or maybe I just need some of these to go dark against that sky. How to approach this? Let's start with these trees are going to get more depth if I blew out the far trees, put a little bit of a thin layer of blue on top of them. It's going to make them, knock them down a little bit, make them go away a little bit. And then I can find the edge of this tree when I do. So let's start with that. That's an easy one. Cobalt blue is my favorite for doing this sort of thing. It doesn't have to be a really thick layer. I don't want it to be a really thick layer because then it'll turn it really purple, but it will knock it back down. I can always thin it a little bit if it turns out that maybe I'm a bit too thick. So these two trees, we're going to let them be here, but this tree and all of those are going to go away a little bit. So let's just sort of find some edges here on what it's. The photograph doesn't really have a lot of demarcation here, but I'm feeling like we should have some. And then maybe it'll go up into about there. Oh, let's bring that in, and some of those can be, and I don't want any of these too straight lines, and then that's all going to go off that way. So then let's just thin this just a little bit in here, and it'll get a little thicker as it goes down the other way. I started looking at the value difference, and this was about 2 or 3 values darker. And let's just put a little more pink in here too while I'm at it, just to get a little darker value to that. I always find this interesting, how doing something like this really changes the feel. And I'm going to need to thin it just a little bit up on this end because it feels like maybe I got a bit too much up there. So we want some value difference, but maybe not as much. And then a little bit of this can happen down in underneath of here where these other trees go back into the side, and maybe just a little shadowy feel there. Get just a little feel of those trees sort of running down in there, and I'm just lifting a little bit of that off because it felt it got just a touch too blue. And then I can still add a little more quinacridone rose in here. Maybe up into there and let that overlap just a little bit. Get a little more loose feel to that. Okay, and then up in here, let's just do a little bit more of the same sort of thing here and there to give a little more depth to these trees. So I'm just making a few places, especially where maybe these branches are back inside, a few places a little bit darker, and I've got to be careful not to lose too much of my light when I do this. So this is the quinacridone rose that I'm using here. Oh, and let's just break up the edge of that. And maybe a little more purple underneath of there. And a few more, just sort of little dots of dark. Little dots of dark, because these run up these branches. Those definitely are going back further away now. That part's good. And let's just get a few more of these little dark spaces. And then I'm actually, in some ways I'm liking this little bit of dark that happens back in there in between those branches. Now I was looking, I cut some little pieces of green from my my sample pieces to see if maybe a little bit of green tree back here would be a good thing. And maybe that has to be a little darker in the bottom of this. A little green tree going up into there. And it's just how much, if I have some in there. This isn't... Or do we want to just put the blue mountain in there? Now that blue mountain, I can put green in on top of that, especially if it's going to be a darker green. So let's start. I still have a little bit of that blue mountain color in my pan, and hopefully it's close enough just to maybe fill this in with that blue mountain, because it just felt like those white spaces that I left there weren't working for me. Get the mountain showing in there just a little more. Maybe that mountain comes down into here just a wee touch more. That's, you know, actually just getting the mountain. Maybe I don't need that green there, but what I probably do need is making some of this a little darker so that it stands out against that sky. This light against dark, dark against light game. And I have to get enough of this, enough of the dark in here so that it doesn't look like I just wanted that little piece to stand out. This has got to come down and become an integral part in more of this. And maybe that can get broken up just a wee touch. Yeah, I'm liking this a little better. And maybe... let's just get some more of this purpley color and maybe find some more spaces back in here to go back inside. You know, where these branches are going to be sort of back in the shadow area. So getting some shadow spaces where I've got the dark branches, I think is going to help a little bit. And unless it hinders. I was just feeling a little too much there. Maybe what it needs is to go the other direction. I have to be careful not to over-fuss this. Okay, that's looking better. It's looking better. Okay, anything else before I quit and say I've fussed enough? Make that one maybe just a tiny bit more interesting there. Oops, is that too much? Maybe not. That felt like something wrong. Let that be a little branch that goes off there. And then what about this dark area back over here? Let's just add a little bit of dark green. I've got a black over here. This was the black I was making the tree trunks with. And let's just mix that with the green a little bit. And touch of ultramarine blue in there. Does that help sort of finish that area back there? Or does it take the eye back there too much? And then this is dark here, so I don't have to have those trees go up and out. Pull our eye back into saying there's something else happening back there without it being really strong. And the question becomes, do I want to take it up and over this the way it is in the photograph? That'd be too much in that edge of the picture. Okay, leave that with just those three. And okay. And then I think one last thing is that we want this to be blurred. I still feel like maybe I need to go even a little darker with some of this down in here on these further far away trees. So then we've got a demarcation between this tree, that tree, and these ones back here. And then just let this be a little darker back in there. And I'm just letting it sort of maybe be a couple of trees working through there. You get a little light edge on the edge of an area where it's okay. And a couple of those, maybe not so white. Okay, Margaret, don't overdo it. Tell me when to stop, you guys. I should be stopping, shouldn't I? But they're a little more perky feeling. Okay. I'm just sort of looking at this and thinking about it and playing just a little bit here. Hopefully my head didn't get in the way. So all I need to do now is to sign it, right? Sign it and it'll be done. Okay. Just sort of looking to see if there's anything else that's bothering me. Oh, I don't like that little light spot right there. It pulls my eye right back in there and I don't want it to. So let's just dull down all those little light spots just a tiny bit, not take them away entirely, but dull them down a little bit. Because the further away you get, the closer everything comes to mid-tone. So you don't have any bright whites, you don't have any blacks. Everything, it all goes just a little closer to mid-tone. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. We'll sign this and take a photograph of it and we will be done.